Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tevach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav HaShalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav HaShalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav HaShalom, and it is also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz, Le'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. We are in the middle of chapter 7, Perek Zayin, and discussing the dynamics of how we interact with this material world, and when we transgress or in any other way do not align ourselves to the purpose for which we were created, by not directing our intentions toward the divine in even matters that we're permitted to do, we temporarily allow the divine energy that's within those klippas to descend in what is called sholosh klippas atmeis. So essentially, two different ways where this misalignment can happen. Sholosh klippas atmeis, the three impure shells, are the things that are forbidden that we shouldn't be doing. We have to avoid them because the energy there is trapped, as we learned, like being held hostage. Osur b'yedei achitzenim, osur v'kosher, bound and tied up in the hands of the enemy. What is the enemy here? The forces that are not aligned to what God wants of us. So that's off limits. And then there's doing things that you're allowed to do, like eating, drinking, things that are permitted, but it's not aligned the intention toward the divine. So that we learned until now. What we've entered into is the area of sholosh klippas atmeis now, which is the things that are off limits, that in the words of the Tanya, we're not supposed to be activating, we're not supposed to be interacting or actively involved with them at all. The dvarim asurim, which are not mutter. Something that's mutter, that's allowed, you can say, and we do say, that since the sparks are not really trapped, it's only temporarily been encompassed in the negative energy because our intentions were not aligned. So when we realign, like he says, Ad Yoshuv, where a person that we are able to elevate them back when we return and do tshuva, and we return those sparks back to where they belong. But then there's the areas of osur b'yedei achitzenim, shelo yuchal lachzer ulalis l'Hashem. The things that are off limits, mashenkim b'macholos asuris u'bias asuris, the forbidden things that are forbidden to be eaten, that are not permitted. Forbidden foods, and bias asuris, forbidden sexual relations, which are sholosh klippas atmeis legamri. Their energy is completely from the impure, the three impure husks or shells, which are asurim v'kshurim b'yedei achitzenim le'elam. They are bound and tied up by the negative forces forever. And what means forever? Forever means in our time. Ad ki yovei yomim v'yavula amovos lenetzach. Till the future, when the day will come, and death will be swallowed up forever, and God will varuch tumar ma'avrim min ha'aretz. When the spirit of tumah, of impurity, which basically means spiritual toxins, will be completely removed, and that's when they will be redeemed. So they will be redeemed. Then there's another way they can be redeemed. That's even today. So even though he said la'olam is never going to be redeemed, so first of all, la'olam he means now in our time. Secondly, even when they're redeemed through our efforts, he's going to make it clear that it's not through a regular tshuva. It takes a very unique and powerful tshuva. And that's what we began learning inside. Oi. So now there's another alternative, which is comparable to what will be in the future. And that's up to our effort. Not God removing the impurities from this world, but us doing it, not entirely from our world, that is. So he says, Oi ashi yaseh tshuva gdela kol kach, or until the person goes through such a profound level of repentance and return, kol kach, to the extent that his intentional sins become like merits for him. And this is from the Gemara in Yuma, as we discussed, Peivav Beis. Exact expression. And that Alter Rebbe says, mamish. So not just figuratively, literally. Literally, why? Because there are sparks in everything. Even in Shalosh Klipos Atmeis we learned, even when he said Ein Behem Teiv Klal, that they have no good on their own, he made it clear that Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Rashab, Amatzad Atzmam, they have no good on their own. But there's always a divine spark. There's no such thing, God forbid, that exists without divine spark within it. However, it's like a black hole. What's a black hole? That the light is, that the gravitational pull of the black hole is so powerful, it doesn't let the light even escape. That's why it's a black hole. You can't see it. That's just an example. Spiritually speaking, it's a situation where the negative forces, like I mentioned, a very toxic environment, a very corrupt environment. You don't go there. Al pi halacha, according to the Torah law, there's certain streets you shouldn't walk. A decadent street, a street there's lewdness or other things that are inappropriate. A person shouldn't walk on that street. Why not? They can walk on the street and think about Torah, because you don't bring yourself to a situation where there's negative forces. It's just like you don't go to a dangerous place. Can you get through it? Of course you could, but you stay away from that. So that doesn't mean there are no sparks there, but the sparks are trapped, so to speak. They're being held hostage. So La'asud Lavi is the first option, the future, when the death will be swallowed up and the toxins will be all cleansed from this earth by God. And here is through tshuva. We're going to speak about what type of tshuva. Tshuva gedela kol kach, to the point that you actually can transform. Literally. Now, how do you transform a negative into a positive? The answer is like we learned earlier. It's the spark within the negative. The negative behavior, God forbid, something that's forbidden is always forbidden. But you can redeem the spark, the divine spark that was trapped in there. And here it requires a tshuva gedela kol kach. So the idea of the sparks actually helps us understand what true tshuva does. So it's not just a thing for the gavra, for the person. That's one thing. That till now a person behaved a certain negative way. He now has charot ala avar, he regrets, and starts a new path. Kabbalah teva ala haba, from going forward, he will behave in the proper way. Okay, that's for the person. But we're talking of the zdainas themselves. Even the negative itself, the divine energy that's trapped in it, that we cannot redeem, a person through the proper tshuva gedela kol kach, and he's going to explain what that is next, can free those sparks. And indeed turn those sparks that became zdainas, because they were like the light trapped in the black hole, like chaticha nasa nevela, like a kosher piece of meat in a big vat of unkosher meat, of treif meat. So for all practical purposes, it's treif, even though it's fundamentally kosher. But it's become trapped, it's become overpowered, and therefore nullified in the process of whatever is not kosher. But tshuva, if you fall into that type of pot, tshuva can extract it and separate it. And we discussed also last class that there's situations like pekuach nefesh, that tells you it's a mitzvah to do something that is forbidden on Shabbos or Yom Kippur, to eat something completely forbidden on Yom Kippur, which two isurim. You're not allowed to eat, and you're not allowed to eat something that's not kosher. But if it comes to save a life and it's the only thing you can eat, so God himself said, I am allowing you to use the spark and use it properly. So the same God, apesh asur hu apesh shehiter. But generally speaking, it's bound and trapped. Think of an example, God would allow us to get the light out of the black hole under certain circumstances. But that is due to a life-threatening situation. Or we spoke about other isurim that may be forbidden to eat, but you're allowed to use it for benefit, like riding a horse, even though horse meat is not kosher. for eating purposes. Here we're talking that a person actually did something that was forbidden. So you would say you're actually feeding the darkness. But tshuva has a power. Essentially, tshuva is able to access that engine room, the same engine room, or even deeper, where God first embedded those sparks and is able to extract the sparks and transform them into zochius. But the question is, what's the dynamics? How does that work? It was forbidden. So it's one thing, again, you could say the person. But you're saying the person has been transformed. But you're saying there's deinas nasalei kezochius. For him, they've become like merits. So the Alter Rebbe explained that this requires a unique tshuva, and that's why it's not so common. So he says, Shehi tshuva ma'ava, this tshuva gdela kol kach that transforms those divine sparks that have become trapped in the sins, in this deinus, in the intentional sins. And remember, because they're intentional, it's not just that the thing is forbidden, the person has also done it. So he's also fed it, meaning feeding it, he's added toxins to the toxins that were there initially. This is achieved, he says, through tshuva ma'ava. So we read this, but I'm going to read it again. It's worthwhile because it's so fundamental. And he explains it in specific terms. What does this mean, this tshuva ma'ava? We know this tshuva me'yira, for example. A person returns, repents due to fear of punishment, fear of God, awe of God. So the Gemara talks about this in Yuma, and there it says he's able to make shgogis, he can make zdeinis kishgogis. He can take a deliberate sin and turn it to like an inadvertent sin, but not zochius, merits. Tshuva ma'ava is what's required. That's a unique tshuva, and in tshuva ma'ava itself, he's going to say clearly tshuva ma'ava rabba, not regular tshuva. Great love. But what does that mean, great love? What does it mean specifically? So briefly, let me say it first, and then we'll read it inside. It's when a person comes to a point of distress and despair. Think of someone traveling in a desert, hasn't drank water for days. So they're desperate to drink. The tzama, the tzemoyin, the thirst from the darkness creates such a surge of thirst to connect to the water. That is the profound love that a person achieves, not through experiencing love, but through experiencing the absence of it. So this is essentially the concept of a person who's parched and has been so distant from what is true and divine, and becomes aware of it, that the very darkness is the catalyst and the springboard that catapults him to a tremendous love, even greater than the love of a tzaddik, as we shall learn. This is the tshuva ma'ava rabba that has the power to redeem the spark. So you see, the spark on its own is trapped there, especially once a person has sinned. That's that. La'asad lave sheyave yemam, when the day comes, the Eibishter is going to do that. Then the death will be swallowed up and the toxins will be removed from this world. But what about a human being? We're humans. We're not the creator. So God gave us a power. He gave us the power of tshuva. And in tshuva itself, a tshuva that comes from such thirst and such love, that it has the power to extract. Sometimes something is stuck in a certain place. So you can't really pull it out. You need other tools, or you need an extra strength. That's what tshuva is. That extra strength, that superhuman strength even, that allows you to pull out a spark that on its own would never have been able to be redeemed through humans. So here's the language now. So this tshuva gdela kol kach that transforms. He says, shehi tshuva ma'ava. This is the tshuva of out of love. Language in the Gemara in Yuma. Me'umka deliba ba'ava rabba. From the depths of the person's heart, me'umka deliba. In other words, you could have a love that's not necessarily from the depths of the heart, but he has ba'ava rabba, with great love. And what is the great love? The chesheka and the fervor, v'nefesh sheikeka, l'dofka boy. The fervor of a craving soul, l'dofka boy, to attach itself, to cleave to Hashem, to God. And then that, which is all psukim, this is a pasuk from, he's referring to psukim from Tehillim Kuf Zayin Tes 1079. But then he goes further. V'tzoma nafshe l'Hashem. So now that he has this, what we call this love from the depths of his heart, with great love and fervor and of a craving soul. So now he brings the next pasuk, also from Tehillim. So what's now happening to the soul that is craving and yearning with this great fervor and great love and fervor? So he says, "V'tzama nafshi l'Hashem ke'eretz ayefa v'tziyah." His soul is thirsting for God like a parched desert soil. So if you look at parched soil, it's not just dry. It's so dry that you drop a little water, it soaks it up immediately. Literally like desperate. That's even soil. Imagine a human being that's thirsty. You're so thirsty you just can't control yourself. You just absorb it all in. So he says and he says like a parched desert soil. Ke'eretz ayefa v'tziyah. Lies explaining, so why is that happening here? So when it comes to soil, because the soil is so dry in a desert, what about on a human level? What's going on with the soul? Why is the soul so dry? He says, Lias ki ad heino hoysa nafshi be'eres sivet samovis. Because till this point, where the person realizes, where was his soul? Be'eres sivet samovis. His soul was in a barren wilderness, in the shadow of death. That's Salmovis. Salmovis is a combination of two words, like Tseil Movis, the shadow of death. And before that, Be'eretz Siyah, a barren wilderness. And what is this referring to? Even though it's using the example of a wilderness, it's referring to Hi HaSitra Achra. This is the other side. What's the other side? The other side, as we learned, is anything that's not directed toward godliness. So soul, Ner Hashem Nishma my soul is a divine flame. The soul of a person is a divine flame. So it's fed by, it's nourished and nurtured by divinity, by godliness. What happens when the soul goes the other direction? It's not getting its sustenance. It's not getting its water. It's not getting its food and nourishment. So it becomes extremely thirsty to the point that it's parched in a land, like a barren wilderness, in the shadow of that. That's called Sitra Achra. V'recheke ma'er pnei Hashem betachlis. Is the other side, that's not the divine side, as distant as anything could be from God's inner light. Recheke ma'er pnei Hashem betachlis. Utterly distant, as far as it could be. So when a person comes to that awareness of that type of parched state, this isn't just he's thirsty. This is desperation. This is a distress that is a catalyst, as we said before, that catapults this parched soul to tremendous love, as we continue now reading. This spiritual emptiness, this void, is the very springboard for this tremendous love. That's where we stopped. Ulazois. And therefore, Tzoma nafshi biyaser eiz. B'tzemoy nafshi satzadikim. Precisely because of this distance and this void and vacuum, the soul now thirsts for the divine water, so to speak. Even more, yeser. Ulazois tzoma nafshi biyaser eiz. Even more, with more strength and more power and intensity than mitzemoy nafshis tzadikim, than the souls, than the thirst of the souls of the righteous. Now remember, righteous people, a tzaddik, because he's connected to God, is always thirsty for godliness, and is also always growing. But there, the thirst is not coming from a state of distress and despair of never drinking. It's a righteous person who's always growing. He continues growing, the horizons continue to grow. So it's like a person who's seen the treasure of the divine and is pursuing it. And that can be with a deep thirst as well. But it's not like someone who's running for his life. Not someone who feels that his life is at stake and that this is it. It's like someone on a cliff, about to fall off. That's the Baal Tshuva. That's the Tshuva. So what do we see here? That the parched soul and the darkness and the shadow of death has all led him to a thirst that's far deeper than the thirst that comes for the righteous people who are constantly or on an ongoing basis being nourished by the divine. So what do you see here? That is the zdainis, the deliberate sins that brought this person to such a dark place. That is the one that now drives him toward this great love for God. So it's not just the person is elevated, but the very sparks are extracted straight out of those sins and transgressions and realigned with their source. That could not have happened without this deep love. And now he brings the famous Maimar Chazal. K'maimorim zechrenim levracha. Like the statement from the sages of blessed memory, B'mokim shabalei tshuva eimdim chulu. In the place where balei tshuva stand, was the end of it? Afilit tzadikim gemurim einim eimdim sham or einim yechelim lamed sham even. So even the great righteous, the complete righteous people, souls, do not stand there or cannot even stand there. It's a different category. Why? That's from the Gemara in Brachos Lamed Daled Beis 34b. Why is that the case? Because the thirst is so much deeper. And now he concludes and makes the idea. So now he goes back. Remember, he said at the beginning that another way of extracting those sparks is through tshuva gdela, till he does a great and profound tshuva, to the extent that transforms the deliberate transgressions and sins to merits. So he says, "Val tshuva ma'aver rabazu," and this specifically this level of aver rabba tshuva from this great love that we're discussing, tshuva rabazoi, amru shezdeinus nasalei kazachis. In other words, you could have a level of tshuva that's not on this level of great love. You could have a level of tshuva even out of love that's not on this great level. Aver rabba, great love, or intense love. But it's dafka on this tshuva that Chazal say, that the Gemara in Yuma says, that the zdeinus nasalei kazachis. This level of great love and intense love is what the sages tell us, that the intentional sins become like merits for him. Why? Hoyel vayidei zeh bola avar rabazu. Alter Rebbe spells it out. Since it is through these sins that the person comes to this great love. So what's the point here? That there's a very unique type of tshuva, a very high level of tshuva. It's not just regret of your past. It's not even a love, it's not even a tshuva coming from love, but a more subdued love. It has to be a desperate one, the way he's describing it. Literally like coming parched, where you're so desperate for and thirsty, so there's such an intensity. That intensity has the power to transform the zdeinis to zachis. And that is similar to what will be in the future. Obviously, it's not like the future. In the future, God will remove all toxins, all impurities. Ruach hatum aver min haaretz, as we said before. But you have an element of that, a taste of it, if you wish. But this comes through the hard work of real tshuva ma'ava that's necessary. You can never have reached it without being in such a dark place. Avol tshuva shalei ma'ava, he says now. But through a tshuva, a return. And the word return, of course, is very precise here, because you're returning the sparks. The sparks were always divine. They just got trapped there, or the way God wanted them to be trapped there. But now that they're returning, he says, but through our tshuva, shalei ma'avazeh, which is not motivated by this degree, this intensity of love. Again, this love. Afshi tshuva nechenu v'Hashem yislach lei. Even though it's an acceptable repentance, an acceptable return, and God will pardon him. So we're not saying it's not tshuva. But kol mokim le nasu le kazachis. Nevertheless, the sins are not going to be transformed for him into merits. Ve'ein elim ha'klipa legamri. And they're not really elevating completely. They're elevating to some extent because the tshuva was done, but they'll not being completely released from being trapped from the negative forces of klipa. In elim ha'klipa legamri, meaning they're still somewhat connected to the shell where they were earlier trapped. Ad eis keit sheyevula hamovas lenetzach. And now he brings back the first scenario. Until the future time, when death will be swallowed up forever, as we just learned before, we spoke about before the tshuva, Ad ki yavayim v'yevula hamovas lenetzach. He doesn't have to repeat Ruach HaTumah Avim Min Ha'aretz again, because he already said it earlier. So here you see the scenario. In the future, all toxins will be removed. Today, the only way you can fully remove it and transform it is through tshuva ma'ava rabazu, this intense and very powerful love for God. But any other but if you don't do that, and even if there's tshuva done that's accepted, you don't really free it completely. And then you still need the future to come, when then it will be swallowed up, and then it will be completely redeemed. But we do have the tshuva ma'ava option. Hoyel va'idezeh, since through that distance, through that darkness, that brought him to the deep love, that can extract and transform Zdenis Lezachis. What you see here is extremely powerful approach to, number one, is to our responsibility in this world. We have the ability to make choices. Even if a person has made a mistake, or it was a deliberate one, we have the ability to do tshuva ma'ava. It's a clear strength that God gave us, a gift, a blessing. And when you do that, you can actually extract the sparks. Now, obviously, the first choice is to live a life, Adam Yosher Helach, a straight life, following Torah and mitzvahs, doing what has to be done, avoiding what shouldn't be done, aligning even the things that should be done toward godly intentions, as we learned. And Shalosh Klipas HaTmeis is meant simply to be refrained from, avoided. But should a person have fallen there, God forbid, this is what is the solution. But either way, la'asad laveh, the impurities will be removed. But we're not supposed to wait till that. We have to do whatever we can in this time that we're living before Mashiach comes, before the Geula. So with that, the Alter Rebbe lays out the process of elevating even those sparks that got trapped in the three impure klippas. So we'll stop here. After this, the Alter Rebbe is going to go and explain some unique situations, and we'll discuss that at length in the coming week. This has been Tanya Applied. Go to tanyaapplied.com where you can find this and all the other programs, as well as pose any questions on the forum. Everyone have a good tavach. Be well.
This has been My Life Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.